Fellas, Super Mario RPG is a thing again. Mallow and Gino are in our palms once more. I never thought this day would come. Mario RPG has not been an untouchable jewel. We've had it re-released on the Wii, on the Wii U, on the Super Nintendo Classic. But it was always just like a re-release. It was just the same game given to us again. But it felt like the whole world, all the characters of this game would just never come back in any kind of form. But then they just went ahead and remade it. And we've played it. We've got it. It's in our hands. And it still doesn't feel real. Ash, I know this game means a lot to you. Have you processed that Mario RPG Remake is actually a thing?
You know what? I still have it, and you said we have it in our hands. I literally do. I have the box right here next to me, and I have it in my hands. And even a week out from the remake's release, I still haven't quite processed the fact that this game is back. It's a game that I never really expected Nintendo to revisit in any way other than repeated ports. You know, Virtual Console, Nintendo Switch Online. I never expected them to really honor this game's existence with a full-on remake, and yet here we are in 2023, and they haven't neutered it or watered it down at all. It is still just as delightfully weird and a little bit edgy as it was in 1996. Edgy for Mario, of course. I mean, stuff like being able to find Peach's unmentionables,
whatever it is,
they are,
yeah.
Whatever it is, we don't know. But my wife was with me when I played that part, and she's like, "Wait, Nintendo made this?" Well, technically Square Enix, but Nintendo helped. They had to sign off on it. It's Mario, and she's like, "Wow, they went there." And I'm like, "They sure did," and that's one of the reasons I love this game so freaking much. And yeah, it's just as delightfully weird as it was back in '96, and I'm so glad that they haven't taken the luster off of that at all. They haven't watered it down in any way.
Yeah.
It's kind of like how FF7 Remake handled Wall Market. I was so worried going in that they would make it less bizarre than it was in the original, and they didn't. They leaned into it, and that's what Nintendo's done here. They've leaned into the weirdness of the original, and I love that about it.
And they've been avoiding that as of late. Like with Mario and Luigi
Yeah.
Superstar Saga plus Bowser's Minions, they outright took Gino out of that game. Like, he was there
Right.
as a reference in the GBA version, but they completely took him out of there. So I just figured that he would never come back. And that remake in itself, it took a lot of those sort of off-kilter Alpha Dream designs and made them very on-brand Mario. It's like the Koopas had a different kind of posture in Superstar
Yeah.
Saga, but then they just made it into like a regular Koopa in the 3DS remake. But here, like, they've taken everything and they've just sort of converted it exactly as it was. It's like they've taken a pre-rendered game and just rendered it. You know, it looks great.
It really
Daniel,
does.
though, are you happy with this thing, or do you think it's an abomination?
Super Mario RPG. It is the only one just for me. When I play the game, I get lost in a phase, and then I find out I'm stuck in Gino's maze. Mario RPG is a game that I played for the first time in the Wii era, because I didn't have a Super Nintendo. Well, I had a Super Nintendo. It wasn't mine, but I had like only 4 games on it, and I never got any more from that. Mario RPG was not one of them. So the first time I played it was from the Wii Shop, the Wii Shop channel, and it felt like it was weird because at the time, even then, it wasn't really that old relatively, but it still felt nostalgic to me because it does remind me of Paper Mario. You see a lot of the influences that Paper Mario took from RPG and made into its own thing, like down to like the flower points using honey syrup to restore FP and all that sort of stuff. Most recent Paper Marios carry a lot of, well, I guess the more recent RPG Paper Marios carry a lot of DNA from that game, and it's amazing to see how it's evolved since then, and also what's stayed exactly the same. Like it's the truest remake in the sense of the term I've ever seen, down from the isometric perspective to like literally filling out the world, because you're like in the Mushroom Kingdom town, and before off to the distance it's just like a blank void, but now they filled all that in. It feels like a more lived in place, and they've really just filled out a lot of spots that originally you fill in with your mind as a kid back then. And now it's just there, and it's a magical experience to have this now, especially in an era where Nintendo is very particular about the rules of how to handle original characters, generalizing all the Toads and such. And to see people get introduced to this and react to the zany character designs and all that, it's been a joy to see it all unfold now.
Yeah, I'm glad someone else here played it on the Wii first, because of course Mario RPG never came out in Europe until the Wii. And I wasn't born in that era. Really. I was 1 year old when this game came out. Ash is short of make of that.
Let me go get my walking stick. Okay, fine.
Oh boy.
But I remember on our Virtual Console, because it never came to Europe, they charged an extra 100 Wii points. It's like usually Super Nintendo games were 800, but Mario RPG, because it was an import, was 900. But I played Paper Mario first, and then went to Mario RPG after. But I'm curious from Ash's perspective, because, of course, this elaborated and stretched out Mario beyond anything he already was. Because he was just a platforming mascot. There were some spin-offs like Super Mario Kart, but the whole world of Mario had never stopped to really have an adventure or a story. This was really the first time where there was dialogue and a plot. So, like, back then, Ash, what was it like for you just to have an actual Mario RPG? We can't take that for granted now with so many sub-series of like Paper Mario, Mario and Luigi, the original Mario RPG, now Mario and Rabbids. Like, do you remember what it was like just to jump into the whole different type of Mario?
Well, back in my day. No, it was actually really cool. Like, you're right, you couldn't take it for granted back then. And for me, I was still a relatively new RPG fan. Like, I had just kind of gotten my feet wet with FF6, which I still then knew as FF3, of course, and then Chrono Trigger, and then Secret of Evermore. So I had just recently discovered my love of, what I would later know as JRPGs and Squaresoft back then. And so for me, I was just excited to have another game from that was, that Squaresoft was involved in, and the fact that it was crossing over with Mario and bringing Mario into that genre for the first time, I think I was still kind of young enough in the whole JRPG space that I was just excited, and I was. I remember it certainly not feeling natural, but I just remember being excited, thinking, "Wow, this is cool. I'm really loving this new genre of games that I hadn't really discovered until really just a couple of years prior with FF6, and that was 94. So really, I'd only been playing JRPGs for 2 years at that point. And so I was still kind of discovering what everything the genre could be. And I just remember it being another late generation Super Nintendo title I was really excited to try. And then, of course, really the rest writes itself. It just ended up being this awesomely, wonderfully weird game that brought new lore and new characters and new spaces into the Mario world that I had in my head. And, Mallow and Gino instantly became two of my favorite characters from that era. And Daniel, I know you and I see eye to eye on this. As much as I love Gino, and I do, Gino's great, I was always more of a Mallow fan. And I saw a tweet that you did like a week or two ago saying, like, finally people are going to know the true value, the true majesty of Mallow. And I'm like, yes, another fellow Mallow stan, because I've always loved that little guy ever since the original, and he's even better in this remake, I think. But it was just it felt weirdly natural to me at the time, I think, again, because I think for me it's not like I grew up playing Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy on the NES. I hadn't gotten into RPGs until just a couple of years prior, so for me it didn't feel maybe as weird as it perhaps would have to someone who had been playing those kinds of games for 10 plus years by that point, right?
Sure, yeah. I think the best part, though, is it doesn't feel dated. It doesn't feel like something that came from 1996. Like, you boot up Mario RPG now, and it feels in line with every other Mario RPG. It just feels so tight, I think what kind of differentiates it from Paper Mario is there is a bit of a square flair in there. So we do have things like we have like mushrooms for healing, and a lot of attacks are done with like jumps or hammers. But there is also stuff like actual spells in this game. Like you can do like lightning spells. But they do a lot of like action commands, which Paper Mario, of course, would be known for later. Like Gino has his beam where you hold down the A button and you gotta let it go and sort of time it just right. Like that's if you've played like Thousand Year Door or Paper Mario 1, you will feel right at home here. While also having a bit more of like a traditional RPG flair to it. Like you go to sort of medieval feeling towns at times. But what really makes it different, I think, is the pace of everything. So Mario RPG has always been a shorter RPG. It takes around 15, 20 hours if you're going a bit slower. But this time around, it feels even faster, because not only does it actually load a tiny bit faster than the Super Nintendo version, which is pretty impressive, but the actual combat plays out faster. Moves that were a bit more sluggish, had a bit more build-up on Super Nintendo, and now just super, super quick. It's like Mario, instead of going like, now just goes, and everything just ends up being a much quicker experience. But there's more to the combat as well, and I'll let Daniel take this over because I've been rambling for a bit. Daniel, what's new? What's new about the combat?
Combat now has, well, let's see, there's a few things different with combat.
Yeah.
We have, thankfully, I'm glad for this thing, is that they actually indicate when to do action commands now. So if you're not sure what those action commands are, and I wasn't really sure at the beginning because there's no real like input or feedback that lets you know that you did it correctly, except maybe one sound effect. A little exclamation point appears when you need to press the A button. And if you do it at the ideal time, it'll cause splash damage, and it'll hit everybody else around the battle, which can also make battles end up being a lot faster because you're damaging everybody at the time once you get really good at it. And what I appreciate is that after a while, that exclamation point will go away once you learn the timing. But if you start messing up a lot, it comes back again to reteach you that you've been doing it wrong. So I felt kind of bad about that because I'm just like losing my pace with it. But at the same time, yeah, like Malice Thunderbolt, I still don't know the timing. I feel like at
It's
times,
a weird
like,
timing.
actual...
It's just like halfway
Same.
through the animation.
I'm so glad it's not just me. I could never get Shocker down as a kid, and even to now, I'm still having trouble with it.
Yeah.
And, it was only in this remake that I figured out the actual timing, thanks to that exclamation mark.
Yeah. So I'm glad that there's some feedback, at least to some extent now. And then that, and also the fact that you can do like your trio attack. You have a gauge that builds up throughout battle, encouraging you to perform your action commands, your defenses, and as you build that up more and more, you can all do a attack with all three party members. And every combination with your party, including Mario, has a different effect, which could be like support or outright damage. And a lot of these things just kind of build off of each other to build a really fast-paced game. Something I appreciate is that this game doesn't really have like layers upon layers of mechanics. Like it's a lot more simplified, so it's a lot easier to kind of get into. And so there's not so many options to think about. Like in other turn-based RPGs, you can either attack or use a special, and characters have very like specific roles. So that sort of thing even feels even more tightened up here in this game, which I do appreciate.
It's definitely a good like first RPG. Like if you've played Pokemon and you haven't dived into Shin Megami Tensei or Persona or Dragon Quest, like I think going from Pokemon to Mario RPG is a great leap, and that would get you even further down the ladder. But even for veterans, it's just fun. It's just light and jolly. And while I do enjoy a lot of the new layers of combat, it definitely does make things a bit too easy at times.
Yeah.
And like at first, I was actually really liking it. I liked the breezier pace, but as it went on, like maybe it is a bit too easy. And they have added an easy mode, but I wish that they maintained just an original mode that just sort of stripped these layers out and that you play it as it was. But maybe it's not too late for that. Maybe that could be a download down the line. But I think that's my only real complaint about the remake, is I would have liked them just to have an option not to have all this new stuff.
Yeah, I think the way it was constructed back then was like you have your Final Fantasies, you have Chrono Trigger for more of a, I guess, quote-unquote hardcore experience. But then you have Super Mario RPG, which is definitely made towards people that are entering the genre. And if there's anyone that asks me, like, what kind of game would I introduce someone to if they want to get into RPG series, I would introduce them to Mario RPG Remake on Switch, like the first thing, especially with all the quality of life options it has now. Like that's a clear way to introduce someone into like the stylings, the formula of an RPG, because it's very simplified, and that's not in a bad way. Like you go into a town and you go to the shop and there's like a pair of pants and a shirt and that's it. Like there's not like lists of options to decide, and there's no like crafting. There's nothing that's super specific or synthesis or anything. It's just very bare bones, but not in a bad way. Again, it's just like that's just the kind of game that it is. And so veterans and people that are more used to like a lot more advanced and involved JRPGs with a bunch of mechanics and formulas might not find this to be very challenging, if at all. But at the same time, it's just a jolly good feeling game that you can jump into, and it just feels fun. The world, the characters, it's great.
Yeah. Saying it's easy, I have died, and I like that there is an autosave now. So if you die, you don't have to go all the way back to the checkpoint. It just takes you back to when the last screen loaded, which is awesome. Like, you don't lose levels, you don't lose time. It just respects you a bit more, and that's one really great modern addition.
There's even really cool new dialogue that kind of pays lip service to that, where at the beginning Toad's like, oh, and this time you can, it just saves by itself. But if you want to use the save block like the good old days, you can do that if you want. But, progress, am I right? And that's just one of those cute little things they added. But I do agree. I love the simplicity. I think it's very refreshing with, especially games these days do tend to love to just layer systems upon systems upon systems and just have all the complexity and you can craft a billion different things.
Here's a skill tree.
Exactly. And it's just I love the simplicity here, but I also do agree I wish there was like an old school difficulty that doesn't have to be, I don't mean like super ridiculously hard, but just a little bit more in line with the Super Nintendo original that wasn't afraid to push back a little bit, that outside of like very specific fights, right? And because the additions that Daniel went over, like the triple moves and not just the splash damage and the triple moves, but also on top of that the ally buffs. If you chain enough action commands together, now you get additional buffs depending on who's in your party, and all of it together just makes an already easy game, which is fine, even easier, which is also fine. I just wish that there was an option to have something a little bit more akin to the original Super Nintendo difficulty, right? But still, that's like my only complaint, and if that's like my biggest complaint, that's not that big a complaint, really, right?
Right. Like, if they ever do a sequel to this game, I hope they keep all this stuff. I just hope that the game's balanced around it in the first place, because it wasn't made for all this,
Right.
But if there ever is a sequel, which I hope it has a chance now, please keep all this stuff, and just make the rest of the game a bit trickier to balance it out.
Yeah, well, I think the only one thing that kind of slightly counters that are the special enemies that you sometimes encounter, which are in fact a bit stronger. But you don't find them very often. But when you do, they do give you a run for your money, quite literally, because then you'll get a frog coin every time you defeat them.
Right.
But that kind of difficulty, I think, would shine for me a bit more if they happen more often. But again, as you said, this is pretty much the same stats of everything, of every character and every enemy in a game where you can cause more damage with buffs and with splash damage and so on. So it's a bit hard to balance around that in this era, it seems.
Yeah. But that's really my only complaint. Usually I am quite picky about remakes. I especially ones with such a legacy like Mario RPG. But I adore everything about the presentation. It just feels like they've literally taken those original pre-rendered sprites and just made them in the modern age. Interiors especially, I love how houses look. It looks like that sort of, like, almost like that Final Fantasy VII PlayStation 1 era of pre-rendered background, but just done in real time, and it looks beautiful. And it's all just complemented by the incredible new score. Like, Mario RPG already had some of the best tracks Mario has ever had, but they all sound stunning. There's not been a single one where I'm like, I don't really like what they've done with this one. I love them all.
Me too. I have been feasting. I knew, of course, when Yoko Shimomura, when she announced she was remastering her own soundtrack for this, I was like, oh my god, this is going to be the most amazing musical experience in this game, because the original soundtrack for Super Nintendo is already so damn fantastic. But even with all my highest, wildest expectations, I'm still just been feasting on this soundtrack. It has been so fun rediscovering every track and seeing what she's done with it, how she's updated the instrumentation. Some tracks are even entirely new songs in a way, like the world map theme. It now has like multiple loops with different instrumentation and layers, and it sounds like it came right out of Kingdom Hearts, which of course makes sense because she did that too. But like some songs just have completely new parts that did not exist before, and you can tell that she had an absolute blast revisiting some of her older work with the soundtrack.
And with the world map, they didn't need to do that, because you're never on that screen for more than a few seconds anyway, but they just added... it's still like, the general melody is still kind of a loop, but they've just given so much more depth to it now. It just keeps getting more instruments as it goes. It's so cool.
It really is.
So-
I just passed the Nimbus Land segment, so I'm closer to the end of the game. And going back to what you were saying about the visuals, John, like Nimbus Land is a perfect example of how amazing, what an amazing job they did taking the look, the early '90s CG, or I should say late '90s CG look of the original, and updating it without doing too much more on top of that, and it just looks so unbelievably clean. And then you just pair that with all this new music, and it's a treat. It's a treat for people who really love, great remakes, but also just excellent video game music.
Yeah, there's so many songs on there that I recall from the original, and I've switched back and forth quite a number of times to kind of listen to the original. Like, wow, this is that song, and then I go back and go back and forth. Like, wow, they really like fluff this one out in a really positive way, and it's so exciting to see, especially in battles. Like, it's so cool when you get a 5-hit combo going. The music changes a little bit, and there's more instrumentation added to it in the background, whether it's the normal battle, a boss battle, or whichever boss battle is. Like, they add more percussion in the background, which makes you get more like it hypes you up a bit more to continue that combo, because obviously you want to defend and attack during, or most optimally. But yeah, every little thing that they didn't need to add, things like that, they've added onto this soundtrack that already was fantastic to begin with, and I'm just enjoying just how fun it sounds. It really puts the whole experience together into a nice little bow.
I'm just picturing another reality where they remade Mario RPG and they replaced, like Boshi didn't have his sunglasses, he's just a normal green Yoshi, maybe a slightly like darker shade of green or something, or but none of that's here. It's like it's just come out of the Super Nintendo era. In fact, it feels very Mario World-y because it came from that time. So there's some Mario World remixes, you get some sort of Super Nintendo-y sound effects at times. It definitely honors that era. But you could play it in the modern day, like a 10-year-old could play Mario RPG Remake now and they can get the full experience. It's not like you had to be there kind of game. It's Mario, you can just jump into it whenever, and I am so happy that this can be the future of it all. This can be someone's first RPG, and what an entry to it.
So earlier this year, my family and I, we saw the Mario movie. I was with my sisters and everything, so they know what Toad looks like, right?
Yeah.
But I was playing the game, and they're like, "Hey, that Toad looks funny because it has the stripes instead of the spots," and I'm like, "Yes, exactly." Point out how these Toads look different and unique, because that's exactly what this series needs, was unique looking Toads, and there's actually that here. And just the fact that there's a whole community of them, the fact that the world feels more lived in, because even at the beginning of the game, you have these two Toads that are going to get married, and then you kind of follow them later on in the game, and they're actually at Marrymore.
Yeah.
And the recurring characters, like Croco is a recurring character. He's not just a one and done character. There's like that tadpole that's in the pond, and he grows up to be an actual frog later you trade frog coins with. Like, it feels more like a living, breathing community more so than other Mario games in that way, for all these little touches, and it's really wholesome and just fun to see.
It is.
And that's such a great point about the Toads too, because actually my wife mentioned something the same when I was at the Mushroom Kingdom, and she was just kind of doing her own thing and happened to be watching me for a bit, and she was like, "Wait, those Toads look weird. They don't look like Toads." I'm like, "Yeah, they're like," and I didn't think about that. I was like, "Yeah, they do. They just look like Toads," because I was used to it. But she was like, "No, they really don't." And I'm like, "You know what? Yeah. They look like 1996 Toads. You're so right. They're not modern Toads at all. They are very much 1996 Super Mario RPG Toads that very much do look different. And they could have modernized that and just made them all look like similar modern day Toads, but they didn't. They really kept this game true to its era, and I think that was by and large the way to go. I think the one thing I would have maybe not kept true to its era, and it's just a minor complaint, I wish there were text box sounds, like,
oh sure.
It feels weird with all this fun,
So quiet,
crafty, clever writing for it to be so quiet.
It feels weird in the CG cutscenes. They've added CG cutscenes to this game now, like introductions of like Mallow and Geno and Bowser, and like Mallow's one in particular. Like, he is like bawling his eyes out in the scene, but it's silent. Like, I would have liked some kind of like gibberish sound or something, but. Yeah. I'm with you there. Yeah.
That's really, but again, if it being too easy and no text box sounds are like the biggest things I can come up with, that's not a problem at all.
No. I legitimately think this game is more important than the 1000 Year Door remake, which I am excited for as well. but this just kind of means more. Like this
It
game was, its identity was pretty far out there for Mario, and it was the first of its kind to kind of do this in the first place. But it had like very non-Mario-y party members. It was a collaboration with Square. To bring this back is monumentous. And we've just had Mario Wonder. It just feels like this is a brand new era for Mario where they are willing to do this stuff again. And to return it with this is so cool. But yeah, Thousand Year Door is, what, months away at this point? Who even knows?
Yeah.
It could be like 3 or 4 months away.
I'm excited.
Well, I think it already got rated in like Australia or something, suggesting that maybe it's a little bit closer than we think. Like, I'm kind of thinking we might see it as soon as like February or March.
Maybe.
There's so many
Possibly.
games happening already in February.
I hope not February because there's too much. Hopefully it's like March, April, May. That would be my preference. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to praise the developers of this game as well. I think it's pronounced Art Piazza. They did the Dragon Quest DS remakes. They've also worked on Dragon Quest as a series as co-developers as far back as 3, I'm pretty sure. But they led like the 4, 5, and 6 remakes, which were in themselves incredible. They basically took those, the NES game and the 2 Super Nintendo games, and they translated them into a sort of 3D, 2D hybrid. So they were a bit more out there than Mario RPG, but they were in themselves remarkable. And I want to give that studio all the money, because they have made 2 of my favorite remakes of all time now. Dragon Quest V Remake is one of my favorites, and now Mario RPG is one of my favorites. I trust them with anything. If you're telling me that they're remaking, I don't know, like if they were to do a remake of Chrono Trigger, I'd be like, yeah, give them all the money, let them have it. I trust them.
Although
with
I
my
wouldn't
life
want
now.
that done in this style. I'd want that to be done HD2D. That would be more of an HD2D style thing for me.
Yeah.
But on that note, though, so Steve and I were talking about Mario RPG Remake on GVG Cast last week, and I brought up something that I think that you both will agree with, but you in particular, John. As we all know, the other series that really heavily utilize early mid '90s CG art is Donkey Kong Country. And imagine if the DKC trilogy got the same exact kind of glow up that Mario RPG got. The exact same kind. Just take the same art style and just glow it up. Don't change too much about it. But you're basically playing the Mario RPG equivalent of, say, DKC 2. Can you imagine?
That would be
glorious.
Get David Wise back for the soundtrack. Yeah.
Team back together again.
That'd be so cool.
That might be asking for a little bit too much. Might be flying a little bit too close to the sun.
They've technically remade DKC twice on on Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance, and both versions lost clarity in doing that. And the Super Nintendo, it looked good, but I think there's also moments where clarity isn't quite as good as it could be. So to imagine them just rendering it all out with modern colors, that'd be incredible. Yeah.
That'd be amazing. And you mentioned clarity, actually, going back to Mario RPG really quickly. Something I love about this game, and we talked about this before recording a little bit, John, is that I can make out details about these weird-ass character models that I never could in the original.
Yeah.
Like, some of the enemy details were a little bit vague back in the original because, the SNES just didn't have that much clarity, as gorgeous as its visual output was at the time. But then, I didn't, for some reason, realize that Valentina's hair isn't actually hair. She's just wearing a bird on her head. I somehow missed that all this time. And it's so obvious now with the up-res and visual clarity in the remake. I'm like, I have a whole new appreciation for how twisted and weird her character is.
What's cool about that character, too, is the overworld sprite and the battle sprite on Super Nintendo had inconsistencies. I think the battle one has nostrils and the overworld one doesn't. And they've done that again here. They could have fixed it. They had the opportunity to, but I think they just want to be so loyal to the original, and I love that.
Yeah. I love that they did that.
There's so many characters where I can't tell if I'm looking at a face or eyes or a mouth, and now I can tell a little bit better. It's still weird, but I can at least give some more definition to what's what now.
I just hope this really does pave the way for maybe a true sequel. As we all know, Paper Mario was originally subtitled Mario RPG 2, but that became its own thing, and that's great. I love Paper Mario, but man, if all this time later, and I can only imagine this game's going to sell gangbusters, I think it already is, I hope that maybe there's a chance they take the reception to this game and be like, you know what, maybe we should return to this specific world of Mario RPG and give people the follow-up they've been wanting for all these years now, and see the return of Mallow and Gino and new original wonderful characters. And you know, there are you know, we have the new monster list now, and the new monster list has like it expands the lore of Super Mario RPG with things you never knew about, all these wacky weird enemies. And actually one of the ones I encountered last night was that the Ribbite enemies are actually the children of the Frogog enemies, but the Ribbite monster list entry specifically says, what do Ribbites call their children? We don't know because they don't appear in this game. That's sequel bait. That is sequel bait. We have to know what Ribbites call their children. It has to happen now, period.
You know, we've got a small idea of how well this game is sold. We have physical sales data in Japan, and I saw somebody will put them against, I'll put it on screen here. Somebody was ranking all the Mario RPGs by their debut sales in Japan physically. And Mario RPG Remake is at number 2, only behind the original Mario RPG. And this is not including digital sales. I think it's under by 30,000. So, counting digital, it probably is the best-selling Mario RPG in Japan at the very least. And I've got to imagine it probably is worldwide as well.
I have to imagine so. And yeah, I did read that this morning. I couldn't quite remember the sales data, but yeah, that hopefully sends a message, right?
But anything to say, Daniel, before we wrap up?
Man, you guys think you can snap Mallow's neck? Like if you approach Mallow from behind, you grab his head and you twist it 180 degrees, would his eyes be like crossed out, or would he be like, "Oh hey Mario, what's up?" Because he kind of detaches, you know. Does he have to turn off the fact that he can detach from his legs, or would that catch him by surprise? What do you think?
I'm going to assume that because he's Mallow and he's precious and must always be protected, that he would be fine. If such a cruel, horrible soul were to even think of such a thing, Daniel, that he would be fine and would be expecting it, and he can cloud detach himself at will and doesn't have to see it coming. Because he's Mallow.
Maybe it's an accident. Maybe you really wanted to get his attention. You accidentally twist his head around too fast. You know, maybe it was just you're too excited. You want to say hello to Mallow.
Have you been thinking this the entire video? Like, is this
I know,
is this what it's been leading up to?
No, I swear, I'm definitely I'm definitely not still sick.
Okay. Well, on that note, everybody,
I'm just wondering.
We hope you've been enjoying Mario RPG as much as we have, and thank you for watching and joining us on our journey. It's so cool to return to this world where we have old-style Link sleeping in a bed. They didn't update him to be Breath of the Wild or anything. We've got Samus resting up for Mother Brain. She hasn't fought Mother Brain in years. It's so cool to have all this stuff back. And what a cool game to have. What a cool remake. But thank you for watching, everybody. And if you want to, you can support us on patreon.com/GVGaming, where you can submit topics to GVG Cast, you can get earlier videos, and a bunch of other cool stuff. So if you want to support us there, please do. But even if you don't, thank you just for supporting us here by watching or subscribing. So we'll see you guys next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.